Chelsea's our vertical market manager, handling climate. Now, I think that's everything kind of in the renewable energy space, if I'm not mistaken. Chelsea, I'll let you talk about that. But let's talk a little bit about what's hot. What market trends are we seeing? What could federal incentives like inflation reduction do for these sectors? And welcome to Cup of Joe.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm
First time.
Chelsea Hunt. I'm the vertical market manager for climate accounts for Ryerson. So what that encompasses for Ryerson is solar and wind, so those renewable energy, but also HVAC and water treatment. So all of those are very important to our climate as things are changing and evolving and new technology is coming out. And also as we had one of the hottest summers on record last year, our HVAC systems are very important to us. So starting with the HVAC market, the residential output is not as strong as it was hoping it would be. Still growth, but single digit growth in that sector, and that's largely due to the interest rates not being cut yet. Homeowners are choosing to repair rather than to replace their units just due to the cost of them. And it doesn't sound like maybe the interest rates are going to be cut anytime soon, it seems like. So that seems like it's going to be kind of a trend through the end of the year, potentially.
I can tell you anecdotally as a homeowner, I know you're talking HVAC, but
Yeah.
solar is something that's come up a lot in some of the circles, and it's a big upfront cost to put onto your house, right? But you get the tax incentives off for it. So I'm with you where, some of the residential, could slow some of that. I know you're talking HVAC, but this thought about solar panels on the house, but it's a pretty big upfront cost to put that on.
And I think that's where some of those in the Inflation Reduction Act could potentially help consumers install some of these new units. I know that there is some with the IRA legislation, heat pump installations for home is going to be potentially a little bit easier with some of the tax credits available. I think up to $2,000 for homeowners that want to install heat pumps. In terms of commercial construction, there's actually a new incentive plan announced yesterday, the Better Buildings Initiative. And so that's a partnership between end users like Whole Foods, Amazon, Target, and heat pump manufacturers to try to install more units, rooftop units on large commercial buildings by 2027. And if it's deployed at scale, it could actually lower the energy costs by about $5 billion for utilities for businesses in the country.
Chelsea, a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense as to what extent these subsidies can have on the cost of any one of these programs, whether be it corporate or residential? If you own a home and you want to consider putting solar panels on your roof, and let's say that, I'm just making up numbers, but let's say the cost of the total project would be $15,000. Do you know to what extent any kind of subsidy might pay back a project like that?
I think the subsidies, I think the tax incentive for solar is I think about 10% right now.
Okay.
I think mostly they're hoping that you'll kind of see that on the life of the panel with the lowered utility costs. But yeah, it is a pretty big upfront cost to do some of these installations, especially with the cost to borrow money being as high as it is right now.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, and then on that front, the commercial outlook though is a little bit better. And that's being driven a lot by food processing, education, and data centers. That's kind of where a lot of the construction market is right now for commercial construction. A lot of energy usage in that as well. So this is where some of the increase in renewable energy, bringing more capacity online to the country will be very important. I think I read something recently that data center usage might increase 500% in Europe in the next 5 to 10 years. So we definitely will need to be bringing additional capacity for renewable energy online. So I think that's where the solar and wind will definitely be helpful for us. Yeah, and a lot of that is solar.
Yeah, it's interesting. Over the last couple of months, we've actually spent a little bit of time talking about artificial intelligence and large language models and machine learning and all that stuff. And it seems like in the last couple of months, people have started to sort of wake up to the notion that, hey, these things are going to need a lot of data center work, a lot of energy, and a lot of copper and electrification related infrastructure, and I would say that includes HVAC as well. And it just seems like we're not quite ready for prime time on a large scale.
Yeah, there is going to be a lot of energy usage. I think right now globally, data center usage is 1 to 1.5% of the total energy expenditure in the world, but that could increase, 2, 3, 4, even fivefold, especially with the AI boom that we have going on. It runs so much hotter than any of the other kind of normal computing we have right now, and so that it's definitely going to increase the need for additional energy capacity.
What was the stat you told us earlier? Every time you use ChatGPT, it's like pouring out a bottle of water or something.
Yeah, it's very water intensive. So, and that's because it takes a lot of the water to cool it down. So every time you're using a simple ChatGPT search, it's like pouring out a bottle of water. So the reclamation of that water is going to be very important as well. So you're seeing some of the data centers install reclamation equipment, which some of our customers are definitely doing to be able to reuse that water over and over again to cool those down.
Well, it kind of harkens back to something I think we've talked about quite a bit in prior Cup of Joes, and I don't mean to toot our own horn or anything, but I do think a lot of times when we get in these computing rages, whether it's cryptocurrencies or AI or large language models, I think sometimes for a short period of time, people forget that you need infrastructure in order for those things to happen, and then something's got to break or something has to happen, and then we realize, oh yeah, we are going to need water to cool the systems. We're going to need electrification. We're going to need metal. We need galvanized steel for the HVAC systems. Kind of brings us back down to earth and realizes why we need these commodities in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then for solar, I mean, we're expected to increase capacity by 38% this year for solar energy. For wind, kind of a little bit more flat. I think globally, we're looking at a 12% increase in capacity. In the United States, it's going to be a little bit more flat this year, flat to up, but solar is kind of the big driver for renewable energy installations.
Hey, Chelsea, I don't mean to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy.
Be that guy.
Because I'm that guy. I've seen a couple instances in the last, let's say, 3 to 6 months of wind farms in Nebraska and or wherever it may be, and places where you have a lot of weather related events, be it a tornado, be it, hailstorms, things like that. And for what I understand, some of these solar farms are getting pretty heavily damaged, at least in spots. I'm curious what your thoughts are with regards to, are there going to be ways that solar farms can be protected or insulated from incidents like that in the future? Because otherwise that seems like it could be a real issue going forward.
Yeah, I think it was a couple of years ago. I think the damage from hail was about $1 billion. So that is definitely an issue in the industry. There's things that consumers like homeowners can do right now to mitigate some of their risk, and that's selecting thicker glass on their panels. So once you get over 3.2 millimeters on your glass thickness, that is kind of the threshold for tempered glass versus just to heat treat it. So that's increased strength. Additional framing to support the panels is important. So if you have a bar behind it or a metal sheet that can kind of help brace the glass for hail impact. And there's also standard testing for the hail is about a 25 millimeter piece of hail, which for those who are not familiar with the millimeters, a golf ball is like 47 millimeters. So half the size of a golf ball. And we've seen up to grapefruit size hail recently, and there's probably only going to increase these like very heavy hail events. That's what's being forecasted at least. So there's some UL specifications that have increased testing. So they test between a 1 to 3 diameter ice ball and at 88 miles per hour. So if you look at the UL certification for those, you can select panels that have been tested a little bit more extensively. And then in terms of new technology, some of the tracking companies, many of them in the last, I would say 6 months or so, have announced software that they could be bolted onto the existing tracking systems that will put them in hail stow mode. So that'll kind of increase the angle, which is a major part of whether or not it gets impacted. So a lot of the hail is perpendicular to the ground, but when you put in hail stow mode, you increase the angle that they're being stowed at, so that way 30 minutes before a major hail event is expected to happen, they'll autonomously go into that mode to protect the panels. And I think when it was in laboratory testing, I think there was a 90% survival rate. So it'll definitely help some of these like major problems that we're having. I know in Texas we had one recently where a lot of panels were damaged. They can still continue to function, but they do reduce their output once damaged.
But in reality, I mean, if you're getting a hailstorm, most likely you're not generating a whole lot of solar energy at that time.
Yeah.
Anyway. So yeah, not a huge deal. Not a huge
Yeah.
issue, sounds like. Very
Yeah.
cool.
And I think that's to your point earlier about the eclipse. I know that was a concern that it might put some strain on the grid. Luckily, we did have an eclipse in 2017 that kind of gave some people a good idea of what might happen. There will be less solar output. It's kind of like seeing a sunrise and sunset in the middle of the day. So even as far as California, where they're not in the path of totality, you still will have some effect. But luckily, we have other energy sources, whether that's wind or the traditional sources that we have, could kind of offset some of that. We also have significantly more battery storage than we did in 2017. So that'll definitely help alleviate some of the grid concerns that we might have during the eclipse.
So Chelsea, you certainly know a lot about climate and great information here. I mean, that leads me to, and you kind of alluded, some of the customers you work with, like what are on their minds right now? What are the things you're kind of helping them work through right now? Some of the, I mean, it sounds like, that's why we have like these vertical market managers, right? You're coming in, you're problem solving, you're looking at things. I mean, what you just described, I think would be, a nice value add, but what's on their mind right now? What are you talking through with them?
Yeah, so I think with some of the acts and laws that have come about in the last few years, there's some refrigerant guideline changes that are happening. The increase for the heat pumps to lower our dependence on fossil fuels. So I don't know if you're familiar with what heat pumps are, how they function, but they basically move heat within your home. So if they heat and cool. So if it's cold in your house and you want to heat it, it removes heat from the outside to push them in. And then if you're trying to cool it, it removes heat from inside your house and moves it out. So there some of these incentives to increase that in homeowners and allow the homeowners to install these are going to increase their popularity. So that's going to require a lot of metal for these. And we're seeing that kind of play out as they increase in popularity and more people learn about them. Heat pumps are a fairly large market in other countries like Europe. I think Norway was one of the ones that has about 60% of their homes have a heat pump. So as they have gotten better for colder climates, we'll probably see more installations here as well.
Well, you said it's something like that is going to increase your metal spend. How are you advising folks to, how are you cost management on, metal spend side of things? Like what are some things you guys are talking about on that front?
Yeah, I think that's where we can bring someone like Nick in to do some risk management and try to help flatten that out a little bit. Typically you're seeing a pretty well forecasted usage model. So you know how many units you're going to be needing, and that's where we can kind of mitigate some of that risk by hedging that or working with Nick to risk manage that.
No, I would imagine these are probably some pretty long-term, large-scale
projects
that are taking place.
Yeah,
right?
so you're looking at agreements in 2 to 3 years typically to try to mitigate some of that risk.
I just got to say thank you for doing my job for me. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, this is the Nick Webb infomercial over here.
That's right.
Yep.
One of the products that a lot of your customers use are aluminum extrusions, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you hearing, I mean, there's a lot going on right now with the anti-dumping decision now delayed out until May. Are a lot of your customers impacted by that, have concerns on that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be a concern. A lot of the framework that goes into the panels, so the framing around the edge of the panels is aluminum extrusions. And so if several countries are no longer able to import as cheaply as they are, I think that's definitely going to impact some people. So definitely want to be able to have a domestic supply chain or in place to mitigate some of that risk as we get the countervailing duties and anti-dumping duties once they're announced.
Yeah. And Mike, it is worth noting that, I mean, even as we sit here today, prior to those, anti-dumping countervailing duty announcements, we're already seeing conversion prices on extrusions. I would say tighter than most other aluminum products that we look at. If we compare current conversions to pre-COVID type conversions, they're probably up by about 100%.
Oh, wow.
Whereas I'd say like common alloy conversions are up by maybe 50%. So it's already a market that's starting out in a tighter spot. And some of that arguably is because we have some of these growth markets like solar that's tightening up those conditions a bit.
Wow.
And then the countervailing duties have the potential to actually further exacerbate that.
Right. Well, I know we're gonna kick it over to the metals portion of it, but Chelsea, stick around for some questions that come in. But before, we move on from your segment, give us anything else maybe we haven't covered, or maybe a big prediction for the rest of the year? I don't know, anything you wanna throw into the fray?
Yeah, I think so. I know we didn't talk as much about water treatment portion of the vertical, but that's, I think, going to be a very big potential going forward as well with the Infrastructure Act. In 2021, there was a $50 billion kind of earmarked for water treatment. So that's drinking water, stormwater mitigation. So I think that's going to be a very big impact industry going forward as we start to see some of these projects come online for replacing lead pipes or just doing municipal water treatment plants as well.